All right, I am going to turn my webcam on here and say hello. Welcome once again to our webinar, Stalking in the Digital Age, Responding to Victimization. Abuse doesn't always come in the form of physical threats or violence. Online behavior is abusive if it makes you feel scared or threatens your safety. In a world where we're always connected, the potential for cyberbullying and digital stalking is more prevalent than ever. Over 200 apps and services exist that offer would-be stalkers a variety of capabilities, from location tracking to harvesting text messages and even secretly recording video. Education surrounding these evolving technologies is desperately needed to prevent and also to respond to victimization in the digital age. The information presented in this workshop is the culmination of victim services, apps research, and feedback from focus groups on effective tools and resources needed in the victim services field. This presentation will build on existing research by informing service providers on new research and technology available to victims on digital safety and preventing digital stalking. All right. Hello, everyone. I am Jared Beek. I am the Vine Marketing and Training Specialist with Appriss Insights. As I introduce my fellow facilitators for today, they also share their webcams. And throughout the presentation today, we will share our cameras as we are speaking, but we'll turn them off when we're not talking. So I also want to note that if our cameras create any lag in the presentation or our internet connection, we may need to turn them off just to conserve our bandwidth. And if there are any issues with the audio today, please have patience with us. We're all on our home internet, and allow that connection to restore. And we will try to communicate with you through the control panel in that questions box if there are any issues. And this applies to you as well. If you run into any technical difficulties, please feel free to close out and join back in. As well, I want to note that some of what we're talking about today may feel a little bit heavy as well. So please do what you need to do to care for yourself and rejoin us as you need to when you feel comfortable. So now, on to your panelists for today. First up, we have our special guests, Anthony Antuna, Claire Ponder-Selib, and Myra Strand. Anthony serves as the Colorado Vine Program Manager and works for the County Sheriffs of Colorado. Anthony, want to go ahead and turn your webcam on and say hello.
You're going to hear me. I was unmuted, wasn't I? Now you can hear me.
Yes, I was about to say.
We love technology, don't we? Well, welcome from Smoky, Colorado. Hello.
Thank you, Anthony. All right, next, Claire Ponder-Selib may be a familiar face for many of you. Claire is the Executive Director for NOVA, or the National Organization for Victim Assistance. Claire serves as the agency's primary spokesperson and manages all operations and staff. Claire, you want to join us to say hello?
Yes, thank you so much, Jared. Thank you for the warm introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It's wonderful to see you or see your attendance. I see a lot of members of our NOVA community and NOVA members, and we're thrilled that you could join us for this important webinar during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And thank you for Appriss for co-hosting this wonderful webinar with us today. We're thrilled to be with you.
Thank you, Claire. All right, and Myra Strand is the Chief Servant Leader and sole owner of Strand Squared LLC, where she provides advocacy training, education, and consulting, specializing in trauma, victimization, and other complex experiences. Myra, you want to say hello as well?
Hi, thank you so much for coming today on this here in New York, rainy day. I don't know, I think many of you probably are experiencing all kinds of crazy weather types as the transition of the seasons. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you very much to NOVA and Appriss for having me, and I really look forward to this very important discussion, so thank you.
Thank you, Myra. And of course, we are also joined by Karen Adams. As training manager, Karen Adams manages the product training programs for Appriss Insights. Both Karen and I develop training content and resources for our state VINE program managers and staff, as well as law enforcement and criminal justice professionals. Karen, you want to also say hello?
Yes, yes. And Jared, thank you for introducing our panelist. I got really nervous. I checked to see if I was muted, you know. I want everyone to know that APRIS is just absolutely honored to present Stalking in the Digital Age, Responding to Victimization. APRIS is a team of technology and data science experts who are passionate about solving some of the most urgent and complex challenges for society, for businesses, from fighting corporate and retail fraud to battling the opioid epidemic, to keeping victims and survivors of violent crime safe and informed. Let's talk about keeping victims and survivors of violent crime safe and informed. That's why you're here today. We are excited to share this information with you during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Thank you so much for joining us. So now that we've had a chance to introduce ourselves, we want to get to know you just a little bit more, a little bit better. So we have a quick polling question for you. Jared, if you would run the polling question.
Absolutely. And you should see that pop up here in just a second. So we would like to know, what is your role within your community? We have a few choices here. We have law enforcement, community-based advocate, system-based advocate, maybe a military advocate or an allied professional. Note, if you do not see your role on there, or if you maybe want to let us know a little bit more about the role that you have, please feel free to share that with us in the questions box. Also, if you have any trouble selecting one of those options on the poll, you are more than welcome to provide your answer in the questions box as well. And we do encourage you all to go ahead and make your selection, and we'll give you a few more moments. All right, and take about 5 more seconds. I see some answers coming through here as well. All right, I am going to go ahead and close our poll. And let's share those results. All right, we have a really great range of participants today, everyone. We have about 18% reporting that they are law enforcement, a 25% community-based advocate, 44% system-based advocate, another 7% as military advocate, and 6% as allied professional. On top of those responses, I see a lot of detail in our questions box. Some volunteer advocates, some that work with the Department of Corrections. I see victim witness advocate. Really appreciate you all taking the time to respond to our poll here. Please continue to submit your roles in the questions box if you have not already. We really appreciate it. And then I am going to kick us off, and we will start talking about the dangers of stalkerware. All right, we are more aware than ever during Domestic Violence Awareness Month that victims and survivors continue to face a number of challenges. So today we want to provide you with resources and knowledge to share with victims and survivors of crime across the nation and within your communities. Our intent with the information we'll be sharing is to create a dialogue with you on stalking education and responding to victimization. So we're going to begin today with just a brief overview of the dangers of stalkerware. To reflect the scope of the problem of victims of domestic violence and stalking, advocacy groups are working to raise awareness about the dangers of stalkerware. In 2019, 72 domestic violence shelters were surveyed by National Public Radio, or NPR. And let's take a look at those survey results. 467,361 victims reported an incident to the FBI. Then another 71% of domestic abusers monitored survivors' computer activities. And 85% of domestic violence workers assisted victims who were tracked through GPS. Victims should be aware that anything they do on their device could be revealed to the person who may be monitoring it using some form of stalkerware. All right, and I'm going to hand things to you, Karen, if you want to take us through the agenda for today.
Okay, sounds good. Our agenda for today is all about our virtual panel discussion. And there are 3 areas of focus. We're going to start with digital technology and how it can be misused. We will provide information on how we've begun understanding digital technology and how it can be misused. Next, we'll discuss why it's important that groups work together in the digital age. Next, we'll talk about responding to digital stalking. We'll open up the session to learn more about the importance of the stalking investigation from Anthony Antuna. Anthony will guide us through investigative preventive processes he and his office have in place. Next, both Claire Ponder-Selib and Myra Strand will provide essential information for advocates that will assist you as you continue to work to provide resources to victims of stalking. And we'll also talk about cyber safety tips, those tips to prevent digital stalking. We will equip you with several cyber safety tips to prevent digital stalking before pivoting back to our panel discussion led by all 3 of our panelists. So we do encourage you throughout the session to ask us questions, send us in your comments as we will respond. Let's move right into discussing digital technology and how it can be misused. Digital technology can be misused when spyware or stalkerware is installed on a victim's phone. In 2019, 37,000 users' phones were attacked by stalkerware, as compared to 2018 with 27,000. What is spyware? What is stalkerware? Spyware is an app, software program, or device that enables another person, such as an abuser, to install and secretly monitor and record activity about another person's computer or their phone. Nowadays, spyware can cost as little as $30, for something that will be able to collect a huge amount of data, such as text, chat messages, phone calls, internet browsing history, and passwords. However, as advocates and technologists have come to better understand just how these programs and apps work, they have identified the characteristics of these behaviors. Stalkerware is about stalking and providing that abuser with surveillance to spy on a victim without the consent of that individual. The term stalkerware is more recent, is a more recent term that draws attention to invasive, intrusive, and dangerous misuse of these tools. We've gotten the question, is spyware or stalkerware illegal? The short answer is yes. In general, it is illegal to monitor another person without their permission or their knowledge. This applies to both in-person behaviors and those acted out via technology. Depending upon the circumstances and context, Installing spyware violates a wide range of laws, ranging from stalking or harassment to unauthorized access of a computer, to wiretapping and eavesdropping. How is digital technology misused? Research done by the National Network to End Domestic Violence on spyware and stalkerware identifies that it is easier than ever before for perpetrators to stalk, to track, to monitor, to harass victims. Abusers, stalkers, and other perpetrators can use spyware to secretly monitor what you do on your mobile device, such as a smartphone or a tablet. These apps stay hidden while keeping their operators informed about the device's activity, such as its owner's location, the browser history, the text messages, as I've mentioned, social media chats, and more. Some of them can even make video and voice recordings. A third party can also access victims' photos from the phone and the camera in real time, along with their browser history, the files on the device, their calendar, even down to their contact list. Beyond installing apps designed and marketed for spying, abusers may also misuse other types of device features, such as, you may be familiar with Find My Phone or a family locator service. This raises concerns about other ways abusers may misuse phones or computer features to further stalk, harass, and monitor. Stalking is a very, very serious problem and often goes hand in hand with other forms of abuse, up to and including physical violence. Why is it relevant for technology companies, domestic violence organizations, community advocacy groups, and law enforcement to work together against stalkerware? I want you to think about that question for a moment. Why is it relevant? And then we're going to talk about 3 areas. As you think about that question, if you'd like to send your comment into the questions area, please feel free to do so. Let's start with law enforcement. If a victim suspects they are being stalked or monitored, they can reach out to law enforcement for assistance and then take that power away from that potential abuser or that stalker. With our victim services organizations, such as the National Network to End Domestic Violence, such as NOVA, our domestic violence victim services organizations are giving various forms of advice to victims, such as reach out to the domestic violence hotline. Be aware that anything that you do on your device may be seen by the abuser, including searching for the spyware or even how to get help. Use a device that the abusive person isn't monitoring. This is important to tell and make victims aware. And also, as we know that you are doing, tell victims to trust their instincts. Look for patterns to help figure out what the person might be doing, providing them those tips. Technology industry providers. Let's talk about what technology providers can do. Technology providers can detect and notify users about commercial stalkerware products installed on their phones. Technology providers can provide data analytics by measuring how often stalkerware threats are encountered. And there have been studies on these tips. By joining forces, technology companies lend their expertise on technology, law enforcement, domestic violence organizations, and community advocacy groups can work directly with victims of domestic violence. It is so important to understand a victim or a survivor's pain points and their request. And it can also help to provide them with cyber safety tips. We have such an exciting panel with diverse backgrounds joining us today they're looking forward to sharing their experiences and their expertise with you. So I'm going to pass things right along to Jared and Anthony now to discuss law enforcement response to stalking victimization.
Thank you, Karen. All right, Anthony, you have quite an extensive background in the law enforcement field. So really just want to start out and see, can you just share a little bit more about your past, a little bit more detail on your bio?
Thank you, Jared. Yes, I spent 22 years at the University of Northern Colorado Police Department. I was the department's investigator for about 10 of those years. The last couple of years as a sergeant over training, crime prevention, and the investigations unit. After I retired from UNC, then I went on to become a Title IX investigator with University of Colorado Denver Anschutz Medical Campus. Title IX is the civil rights law that talks about non-discrimination, which also includes the investigation of sexual harassment, intimate partner violence, and or gender-based stalking. So I did quite a few stalking investigations with the University of Colorado Denver and Anschutz Medical Campus as a Title IX investigator, and of course handled some stalking investigations within the University of Northern Colorado Police Department. Also, I was a trainer, still am a trainer with the Anti-Violence Against Women Project, where we do law enforcement training for here in Colorado for the law enforcement and victims advocates and prosecutors. And again, as Karen was talking about earlier, the multidiscipline training that I believe is so important as we're going through these investigations trainings and as we talk about stalking and other forms of domestic violence and sexual assault. Very, very important to do that multiple disciplinary training.
Absolutely. Very, very much in agreement there. And of course, one of the reasons we're really happy to kind of bring everybody together today. When we were planning out the webinar, you know, we talked a little bit about some different scenarios, and I know there were some cases that stood out for you, or some cases that you worked on, or that others in your county have worked on that involved some of the elements of digital stalking. Would you mind sharing just an example or two with us? You know, what did that look like? What was your process, and how did you respond to those victims?
Jared, most of my cases that I handled with stalking, both as a Title IX investigator and also as a criminal investigator with UNC, most of those involved a lot of, when we did cyber stalking and those types of things, digital stalking, most of those involved the social media aspect. A lot of things on Facebook and other social medias that we had. And then also there's one particular case that stood out to me here in Colorado. Out of the county that I live in. I live in Weld County in northern Colorado, the Greeley area, and we actually had an officer who filed charges against a private investigator who had placed a GPS unit on the vehicle of his client's ex-wife so that they could monitor where she was traveling. That case did get some national attention as Private Investigators Association was looking at that very closely and saying, well, wait a minute, you know, what's going on here in Colorado? The person was actually convicted, not convicted of the stalking where the initial charge had taken place, but was actually convicted of a harassment charge. And so those are the types of things that you know stick out to me in my mind of when we look at the digital stalking and other cases that you know other folks have used. We had another case here in Colorado where somebody had been using a lot of cameras. And then monitoring those cameras. We had another one that using GPS where there was a father who, the mother and father had been divorced. So during the time that the father was holding, had the children during his visitation time, he had purchased GPS units and sewn them into the coats of his children. So that when he went home, when they went back to mom, he was able to monitor them and was watching them in the via computer. And was able to see where mom was going with the kids and be able to see all of that. And then it also brings to point an issue of being very, very careful because Some of these stalkers can be very, very dangerous. It just happened this person lived in a rural area here in Colorado, and when the deputies did go to go talk to him about the situation, they were able to see, as they walked up to the house, they were able to see the computer that had the GPS unit being monitored, and also next to that computer was a pistol. So again, these folks can be very, very dangerous. And Jared, I think I lost your audio there.
Oops, sorry about that. You did. That was my turn to be on mute. But again, really, really good examples of some real world things that that you've seen, that you've worked with. And I know you have some things to share here on what does an investigation look like? How is an investigation conducted when talking about stalking and some of these elements?
Stalking can be a very difficult case to investigate, and they are very difficult to look at. And in many times when we start looking at digital stalking and these types of things, we have to work again closely with those folks that know their IT. When you're looking with forensic IT folks and within your department, or having to go out and looking at some of these things, going to some of these folks to be able to help you with these systems, because many times that's what you're going to have to end up doing. And learning how to get production of records and these types of things from various internet and even cellular services to be able to get those production of records. But again, when I look at victims and looking at stalking investigations, we need to be sure that we're being victim-centered, offender-focused. So what we want to do is center our investigation on what's happening to the victim, what types of things are taking place. We're going to go in just a little bit about some of the definitions that we have here in Colorado. And again, I'll be speaking of Colorado, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to know your stalking laws. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But understanding how the victim is feeling and some of the things that are going on with the victim at that particular point in time. This is what some of that difference between stalking and harassment, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So we center in the investigation what's happening to the victim. Let the victim be able to give you the details and to listen to what that victim has to say. Then we focus our investigation on the actions of the offender, just like we would with any other type of investigation. What are the actions of the offender in order to meet the elements of that crime? So we'll go to the next slide here. So we want to start by take the report seriously. There may be times, and Myra and Claire can talk more about this, but there may be times where a victim may not even believe that they're being stalked, because they may not understand the laws of stalking. Obviously, they're not going to understand all of the elements of the crime, as we say. But they may also think that they might even be quote unquote crazy because things are going on in their lives and they're not sure what's happening. And so it's good to work again with your victim advocates and the victim service providers that can help with talking with that victim. And then you're also talking with the victim. So you want to start by believing the victim. One thing I like to say is that victims should never have to defend themselves in any type of a case. We should not be judgmental of our victims. So they shouldn't have to be trying to make us believe. Then we should start taking the report seriously, start by believing the victim. So we're going to want to take detailed statements from the victim. And I know that these are some basic investigation tools, but again, with these types of cases that are so difficult, not only to prove, but difficult to investigate, to get to that piece where we're sending this off to the district attorney to see if we can even get these cases into court. But again, what is that personal background, the relationship with the stalker? We'll talk a little bit here in just a bit about intimate partner violence. And again, looking at the emotional impact of the stalking. Here in Colorado, we have a definition in Colorado that we look at called emotional distress, serious emotional distress. And it's not something that's technically a mental issue, but it is any changes that the victim may be taking as a result of the stalking. What are the actions of the stalker? Are they stalking the victim's family? Are they stalking victim's friends? What types of things may be stalking, and how are they stalking? Are there current protection orders? And we don't automatically recommend protection orders, as sometimes they increase the risk for the victim once a protection order is set up. So again, what types of protection orders there might be. And I think, Karen, we did have a, yes.
Yeah, let me come right in because we do have a question regarding protection orders. The question reads, I'm wondering if there are restraining orders for online cyber stalking. How are they created if a person knows who is stalking them? And then how can they be enforced?
And again, I'm going to talk about Colorado specifically, and I think if Myra and Claire have any other, if there's something that they may be able to bring in with this as well. But here in Colorado, we have protection orders that do specifically talk about, not necessarily specifically talk about the cyber stalking and digital stalking and these things, but we do have our protection orders talk about that there's to be no contact, there's to be no harassment, there's to be no stalking, and that's the language that are in our protection orders. And also part of that, then when we look at specifically here in Colorado with our harassment law, is that we do have language in there that when there's any type of initiated contact that's initiated by the person with the person that has the protection order against them, the restrained party. There's language in there that talks about that they're not to have any initiated contact, and that also includes the types of contact are going to be including things like telephone contacts, data management systems, electronic means. So again, it talks all about the electronic means and the digital cyber stalking. And so here in Colorado, how they're brought about is just again, we have that they have to go through the courts unless it's what we call a mandatory protection order or a criminal protection order that's given to offenders at first appearance by a judge. It's a lot like the bond restrictions, but they also have a protection order against them called a mandatory protection order. And then that again is automatically any types of contact, including that initial contact. We also have civil protection orders where a person who wants to be, the protected party has to go to court, to the courts to get those protection orders. But again, those protection orders will have those non-contact orders of any type of contact, including digital and electronic orders.
Thank you, Anthony.
So as we talk about that, we also talk about, again, asking questions like the stalker's access to weapons, these types of things. And as we're taking the detailed statements from the victims, one thing that I like to bring out is that we don't want to stop the What that means to me is that when you're talking with somebody, and I've had the opportunity to consult and work with different agencies as we're looking at investigations, and I've heard some recorded interviews and recordings of different interviews with different victims of whether it be stalking, domestic violence, sexual assault. And many of the investigators that I hear their recordings are doing a fantastic job. But the one thing that I always catch is this, that when somebody is talking to you and all of a sudden that victim says something about, okay, this happened, and then they say, so I was doing this, and a lot of times what I'm hearing investigators do is that as soon as they hear that that to them is their time to come in and ask another question. And I would disagree with that. That's a time to wait, give the victim or whoever you're talking to the opportunity to gather their thoughts, to think about what it is they're going to say. That's kind of just that brain pause, as we call it. So allow them to talk. And it's also just a good listening skill, because they know you're truly listening to them as they say something. And if they don't have anything after the then that's fine, but at least you give them the opportunities. Don't kill the We don't know that the next statement that they're about to make is something that was very, very critical in the case. But if you start asking them a question right as soon as they're saying and not giving them the opportunity to finish that thought, many times we've lost what they were going to say. And there may not be that opportunity to get back to that, and it could be extremely important of what they needed to say during that time. So next slide here. So we do have what we call a stalking log, and I know that Myra's going to be talking about a little bit about that. I think we also have that in our handouts for this webinar. But we want to ask the victim to begin logging the stalking behavior. Now, I've also asked victims in harassment cases to log behavior in these types of things, but I look at the difference with this, and that is that harassment is more of an annoyance. A victim may be annoyed by the telephone calls, may be annoyed by these things, and so that's what we look at with harassment, even within our state statutes here in Colorado. Stalking, though, has a different effect on the victim. Stalking may make that victim change the routines, makes that victim do something different within their lives because of a fear that they have, because more than just an annoyance, it's fear of that stalker. And so when we ask the victim to log that stalking behavior, we're going to ask them to do a lot of different types of, even if they are not sure that they saw that victim or that they saw the stalker, that we want them to start logging any contacts, any even possible contacts. Again, listening to the victim of what is going on, and this is why when they start to document that stalking behavior and logging that. So we want to also verify and corroborate the facts. This is what we call evidence. Is there evidence of the ongoing conduct? So we're looking at, even if we have a victim who's logged and documented that, what is the issue of not going, maybe going to see if that, maybe it was at a parking lot at the local grocery store. Is there surveillance camera there? Did somebody else see something? And so these are the things that we want to do and we want to ask. The conduct, is it escalating in frequency? Are we seeing more conduct? Are we seeing more contacts? Are we seeing more sightings of the perpetrator? And is it escalating in severity? Many times we'll talk about this a bit, that it sounds like, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. And then all of a sudden it's not I love you anymore. Now they're calling that person a name. They're calling that target they're going to kill them. They're going to do something to them or something to their family. So we need to find ways to find evidence to support some of all of these incidents. And that's where the investigator is going to have to look to see how can we find this evidence. What are some issues that we can look? Surveillance tape, cameras, zoom cameras, ring cameras, all of these different types of cameras that may be out there. Maybe sometimes you ask a victim to help being their own investigator by setting up some cameras. These types of things that maybe they have. Another thing is what about some witnesses, neighbors? Start doing canvassing and ask neighbors if they noticed anything different. What did they see? I know when I do neighborhood canvassing, when I would not ask, did you see a stalking? Because what does stalking look like to that neighbor? I would just ask the simple question of, what did you see? Have you seen anything today? Can you tell me, did you see anything, not even normal, abnormal? What is normal or abnormal to them as opposed to as normal, abnormal to you? Just to, give them, see if they give you the opportunity to being able to tell you that, was there anything that you saw today? Can you tell me, there's a vehicle, any vehicles that you noticed? Was anybody walking around today? Could you tell me about that? Then the other thing is being prepared for confusing recounting of incidents, out of order, mixed details, and Claire and Myra can talk more about this, but this is a trauma response. Victims are going through trauma. They're not even understanding. They may not even understand what's going on in their lives. They're not understanding the stalking because, again, they don't know that this is what's going on in their lives. They don't understand what it is. They're seeing these things. People are they're noticing things. Flowers left outside, cards left in, people saying things on Facebook about them. All of these things that are taking place, and they've been experiencing a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. So again, that stress, the trauma response of that stress is that sometimes they're going to forget things. Some of these things, they're not sure what's taking place. Things seem out of order to them, and then they're going to tell it out of order to you. Each of us has gone through some stress. And I like to talk about with stress with law enforcement is, I was not involved, but I had a very good friend of mine involved in an officer-involved shooting in which this officer, my friend, was shot 4 times. Didn't even know that he had been shot. He knew when they started the chase, they were chasing the suspect into an alleyway, and as he knew that there was another officer there with him, but if you were to ask him about the officer that was there when they were firing the shots, they were able to fire the shots and put down the suspect, but that officer, Matt, could not tell you that there was somebody standing right next to him firing shots as well. And again, all of that, we know that there was somebody there. The other officer can tell you that they were there. The other officer wasn't hit, but Matt was hit 4 times. So a lot of stress and anxiety, and so when we go through these trauma responses, understanding, even us who maybe have not been involved in an officer in a shooting incident, but a traffic accident or something, that all of a sudden we see things taking place in a slow motion, that it really wasn't slow motion. But again, this is what victims are experiencing through the trauma response, and we need to be able to understand that and to be able to help with that situation. And if you haven't had a chance, and I know Myra can talk about the trauma response or trauma response interviewing techniques, these types of things, And I know that she and her husband do classes on those. So again, this is something that we need to be well aware of and to understand the trauma response that victims may be going through. So again, knowing the statutes of your state, what is the state doing? Well, we here in Colorado, harassment or stalking used to be part of the harassment law, but about 10 years ago or so, we changed that and we made stalking its own law. We made it into a felony. It wasn't part of the harassment law anymore, so it was its own statute with its own elements. And then understanding what the elements are and what do I need to do to identify and meet the elements of this offense? How do I capture those elements? How do I develop the evidence to do that? And then any other definitions associated with that statute. And we'll go over some of those here right now in the way that Colorado is set up. So we look at, the stalking investigation, and remember that every stalking case has potential to escalate. As we talked about before, what's going on with the victim. And stalkers are adept at taking non-criminal behavior and criminalizing it. We actually had a case here in Colorado where a young lady received flowers, and she received a dozen roses at work from an ex-boyfriend, and she was sick to her stomach. She literally started to throw up in the trash can next to her desk, and everybody else was looking at that saying, well, what a nice gesture that this person did. I mean, all he did was send you flowers, and she is just sick to her stomach. Well, as the investigation proceeded, it was a case where she was told by her ex-boyfriend, the day that I send a dozen roses to your work is the day that I'm going to kill you. And no one else knew that. That wasn't even, there was this threat, but all of a sudden now she's receiving these dozen roses, and that's what that meant to her. And everybody else sees this as that's not a criminal act. It's not illegal to send flowers to somebody. But then they have a way of looking at these types of events that are not illegal. I had one in a case that we investigated where a young lady was sending, she sent not a dozen roses, but a Valentine's Day card and scissors. And in the Valentine's Day card, what it read was, I hope you have a great Valentine's. And by the way, I love rough sex. And here she is sending, a pair of scissors to this person. And so, how that person took it, that was a female stalking a male, and how he took that was, he was very afraid of what was going on in that situation. So what does it look like? Vandalism, following, text messages, again, may not be illegal, but some of these text messages, voicemails, emails, I know, looking at IMing, instant messaging, so Facebooks, all these other things, blogging. And again, they may not do anything directly to that person in some of these, like emails or the text messages or Facebook. A lot of the cases when I was investigating some of these cases, they were Facebook that was being sent to other people that were describing and just putting the other person down. A lot of different types of Facebook comments that were made that were very derogatory toward the victim. And what does it sound like? Again, we talked about that before. There could be, I love you, I miss you, please be with me. It could be somebody, we're going to talk about intimate partner violence, but it could also be somebody who the victim does not know. Maybe they've met them, with some of the incidents that we had were in class. They met them in class. They never even talked to this person in class. And all of a sudden, this person is stalking them, sending emails to them, sending things to them, going there to their office. And so it was, I love you, I miss you. When the person was being rejected, he was asking for dates via the Facebook and text messages, and the victim was saying, no, I don't know you, I don't know who you are, I'm not going to date you. Then all of a sudden, some of that language started to change. Was you bitch, or I hate you, or it never got in my situation to I'll kill you, but it could be into some, this is another, the escalation. That's why we talk about the severity of the conduct. And what does it feel like? Sometimes it's annoying. Like I said, it's annoying and it might just be harassment. But at that point, but then it could also turn into being scary. It could turn into being fearful or angry. And so again, in order to find out how stalking feels to them, you need to ask your victim, ask them how it made them feel. And that's one of the things that we put in our stalking log here is, again, how does it make you feel? You need to ask that victim, what is going on in your life? Have you made any changes? Or at least ask them, how does this look like? Again, how do they stalk? They follow the victim. They wait for them at their home. unsolicited, unwanted cards, letters, flowers. They harass family, friends, and coworkers. Vandalism. We had a stalking case in the Denver area, and the Denver district attorney was able to get a conviction on this. And the stalker was just simply the victim had bought a brand new vehicle. Stalker went to the parking area where the victim had parked their vehicle in the apartment complex and would paint on it. Initially, they thought it was just maybe somebody was just doing that, some unknown person. But as the investigation started to go further, and every time that the victim would repaint the vehicle or fix the vehicle, then this stalker would come back, and they were able then to do a little bit of surveillance and look at other things, and were able to find evidence that it was the stalker, was the ex-boyfriend that was doing this. And then things like cars that are their windshields are broken, or tires are slit, or even things like mirrors are taken off. And that's one of the things that we would be looking at is, even if the victim didn't have, an ex-boyfriend in the area, maybe it was somebody in class. We would ask those questions. Is there somebody in class that is showing you a lot more attention, or maybe that's making you feel quote unquote creepy or whatever? And then we would start looking at that person of saying, okay, maybe it was just a random thing, but when it happens 2 or 3 times, not random anymore. So again, here in Colorado, we have our stalking law. We have what's called a credible threat. Basically, not reading the entire thing here, but the credible threat is it puts a person in fear of their safety or the safety of their immediate family. And so when we look at those, the conduct in connection with a credible threat, which is also part of our law, we look at acts which further advance, promote, or have a continuity of purpose and may occur before, during, or after the credible threat. So that's where your investigation needs to be, not just what's going on after or during, but what happened before. And you may have to go back a while back, even months before, sometimes even longer than that. So you want to look at before, during, and after that credible threat, or when the person started to feel that fear for their safety. And again, repeated actions that would cause a reasonable person to suffer serious emotional distress, that's part of our statute. The victim does not need to show that they receive professional treatment or counseling. Some of the examples that we look at are intrusion on their privacy, the quality of life. Have they changed things, changing phone numbers, changing their address? I mean, literally moving. Routes, how they change routes to work, changes in routine. That change in routine could be that I'm going to call my friend every time I leave work. I text my friend, and when I get home, I text my friend that I'm back home. I feel safe. And again, those are, the second, what we call, I look at secondary outcry witnesses. Well, those are the folks you want to talk to, and maybe talk to them about what was their quality of life, what was that victim's quality of life prior, and did you notice a change in that victim's quality of life later on? And those are the witnesses, because we have witnesses, even if there's only 1 or 2 people, somebody else knows something. And so these are the types of cases that we go and we look for those folks and find out. And even sometimes talking to the stalkers, even their friends, even their family. I've had cases, it was a sex assault case, but it's still these types of cases are difficult, that where we talk to the perpetrator's best friend, and the best friend said, you know what, I know he's doing this stuff. It is annoying. It is not right. And I'm going to tell you what's happening, because this person stepped forward and said, I know he's my best friend. I've known him since high school, but I'm going to let you know this is what's going on. And he brags about it, or he talks about it and says that he's doing these types of things. So again, don't put those folks away. We've got those, what I call secondary outcry witnesses that are out there. The intimate partner violence or intimate partner stalking, this is the person that just can't let go. This is the person to believe that a relationship has really ended when it really has ended. They may be emotionally abusive, very controlling during the relationship, but that control, they want to maintain that power and control after the relationship, and so they're going to do things like stalk. They have criminal histories, maybe unrelated to stalking. So maybe we want to start looking at their criminal histories and seeing for these things. I did this presentation for our COVID conference here yesterday, and one of the questions that we had is, can a person stalk another person even while they're still living together? And that is absolutely true. That is absolutely yes. They can stalk. And again, that intimate partner stalking, there may not be a separation between the two of them, but that person has that much power and control. They may do things like follow the person wherever they're going to go. check odometer readings, these types of things. Have that spyware that Karen had talked about earlier on their partner's phone. Have GPS units, even though that they're still together, but have those things, making sure that the person is where they're going to be and where they're supposed to be. Again, just making phone calls to friends and making sure, I'm saying I'm going to go out to lunch with this friend, and they're calling that friend to say, hey, I just wanted to see what's going on. And, again, these friends, talk with these friends on these types of things. That stalking could be taking place, right? Even as they're still living together. And we'll talk more about this, the use of technology, the phones, the cameras, the GPS units, all of these things. Cameras are so easy to get and so easy to put in. I remember when I first started in this business, in order for us to get a surveillance camera, it was anywhere from $500 to $1,000. Now you can get them for $5. You can buy them, in different things, like in a stuffed animal or just however you want to put that. Listening devices. I mean, even if, we have these telemarketers or these late night telephone or television commercials, that talk about this listening device so that you can hear birds chirping from 30, 40 feet away. They're going to use these types of things because they want to hear what's going on. So they may use a listening device to do that. Computers, we talked about malware, we talked about spyware. There are just so many different types of things to be able to put into computers, keystroke identifiers, all of that. There's so many different types of technology, the social networking sites. When I first started doing stalking and technology investigations, I remember that the smartphones started coming out, and people would ask us, my training partner and I, about the smartphones, and it was like we couldn't even talk about that because by the time we finished our sentence, the bad guys were already going to have something else within that technology to use to be able to stalk their victims that we don't even know about until we actually hear about it. So again, working with your IT folks, your forensic IT folks, and if you have something within your department, if not, then see if there's another one within the department close to you that would have that. Many of the major departments have IT folks. The state labs have IT folks. The forensic folks that can look at that, they can tell you about how to get into IP addresses, how to find IP addresses, how to get header information from emails, how to get the IP addresses from different types of places, and understanding, yes, there's spoofing that's out there, and we'll talk more about that later on here, and other types of technology, spoofing and proxy IP address servers, and a lot of things that those folks are those folks who are using this to be malicious and stalking, they know very much about it. So we need to also keep ourselves updated on it as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anthony. And we have had several questions come in while you were presenting, and we've responded to several of those. We have one or two to ask you, and
okay.
You refer back if you covered some of these details in your presentation. The first one is there a clear federal law that criminalizes digital stalking, and what are the penalties for such act?
Now, I'm not familiar with the federal laws, but if that person wants to, I will look that up, and I will see if we can get that information for them. I've trained federally, nationally with this, and I've trained a lot here in Colorado, and actually working down in, we have a couple of Indian reservations here in Colorado, so we have to not only know the Colorado law, but those laws. But I'm not clear on that one particularly, but I can get back to that person if they're wanting to do that, and I can see what we can find for them.
That's great. We will get their email information and provide it to you following the session.
That would be great.
Another question that we have is blackmailing taking into consideration?
I think that's absolutely. Again, that's some of that cyber stalking, some of the stalking that's taking place. Absolutely. We actually worked a case, and now that you brought that up, we actually worked a case, and I was doing that as a Title IX investigator, so I wasn't in law enforcement at that time. I was already retired, but as a Title IX investigator, we had, something that was very similar, that if you don't do this, then we will do this. Or if you don't do this, we actually have a law here in Colorado that is a law that speaks against using, images for pecuniary gain or monetary gain. And so if we're using digital images, for example, one of the cases that we worked was a young lady who had taken, exposed pictures of herself. She had taken nude pictures of herself, given them to the boyfriend. But then when they broke up, the boyfriend was actually going to use that as what we call a revenge porn. He was going to send that off to a site. And so we see a lot of those, and I'm sure investigators have seen many of those. I don't know what other laws in Colorado that are in other states, but in Colorado we actually have what we call our revenge porn law, that it makes it illegal to use those types of laws. But I think that we also have extortion laws. And again, just to remember that just because it's happening via cyber, like now it may be, you may have to go cross jurisdictions. We had a case where we had to go, it was actually occurring in Florida, but we had to work with those folks. And again, understanding your laws, because some of these laws are written in such a way that, especially for harassment and stalking, that it doesn't matter where it occurred. If the victim's here in Colorado, even if it occurred out of the state, we're still going to prosecute that, and then we'll work with the other agencies to do that. So no matter where it's taking place, is understanding that whether it's an extortion law or blackmailing, whatever your state law might be, just because it's happening via cyber and cyber, it's still illegal. Again, going back to the protection orders, we're still doing the protection orders, even though it's a cyber contact, cyber stalking. The laws are still the same, usually in most cases for whatever crime is taking place, whether it's cyber stalking or whether they're stalking you personally.
Thank you. All right, I think that takes care of our questions up to this point, Anthony. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, just want to echo, thank you so much for that detailed overview of how law enforcement can work to support victims of stalking and help each other further understand this crime and what it looks like. And this slide right here is actually a really great transition to my next point, almost like we planned it. Looking over all the technologies that you see here, think about how integrated a lot of these technologies are in your own life. And we know that technology is very prevalent in our everyday lives. I would venture to say most of us have cell phone plans. We have accounts where we've shopped online at places like Amazon, and even have some streaming services like Netflix or Hulu. And all of these different pieces make up what is called our digital footprint. And here's a fun little image of what that digital footprint might look like. Karen gets a kick out of this every time I show it. And so you'll see here on the footprint that there are streaming services, games, social media accounts, apps that use credit card information or banking account information, as well as apps that use GPS or location services. So when you're looking at this footprint, think about what happens when all of those things that are in your digital footprint are also entwined with another person's. Digital footprints can be large, they're complicated to navigate, and then victims leaving an abusive relationship may have to try and untangle those many, many digital ties that they have with their abuser, including their social media accounts, any shared cell phone plans, streaming services, and even online banking accounts. And there's many cases where even an individual may not even have a direct connection or a relationship with the perpetrator. So when the abuse is not perpetrated by an individual with a personal tie to the victim, digital stalking can be even more difficult to capture. There are privacy laws that can protect consumer and individual account information. And even when one account or email address is blocked, a bad actor can create multiple fake profiles on social media, create anonymous emails, and then can continue to carry out victimization. There's not an easy resolution to all of these issues. And we know that being careful with this is a huge portion of how we respond and how we work with victims. So we do want to take a moment to highlight some of the ways that victim service providers are currently working to assist with reporting stalking, assisting victims, and preventing victimization. And so let's transition to some of the resources that our panelists from NOVA are going to provide on how advocates can learn and how they can learn from Claire and Myra's experiences. And Claire and Myra, you both have interesting backgrounds that you're bringing to the discussion today as well. And so I want to invite the opportunity for you both to share a little bit more with us as well. Claire, you want to start?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jared. And thanks, Anthony, for that really interesting overview that I think really demonstrated how stalking has evolved in our country. I will say I started off working about 25 years ago as a domestic violence advocate. And most of my experience with stalking is through working as a domestic violence advocate. Things were a bit different back then. You know, we're talking about some of the technology, which a lot of it didn't exist back then, but a lot of what I saw firsthand was some of the more basic use of technology to stalk that still exists today, including, you know, the calling and hanging up or music playing in the background and victims coming in and saying to me, I know it's him. I know it's him. And I think that's, to me, one of the most challenging aspects for victims, you know, particularly when we're looking at domestic violence and the connection to stalking, is so often there are all of these little pieces, and all of those pieces the abuser is very effectively using to instill fear in that victim. They know exactly what they're doing. And yet, from an outside perspective, and that's from a law enforcement perspective, that's oftentimes family members, friends, very well intentioned, it can seem like almost nothing. And I know one of the things that Myra is going to be introducing, and we talk about this a lot in advocacy, is a stalking log, which to me is one of the most critical ways that advocates can work and support survivors of stalking, is really helping them document all of these different incidents, which all together demonstrate a pattern of behavior. And especially, as Anthony mentioned, when looking at really the emotional impact upon victims, because it's very intentional in terms of, you know, causing the fear of being believed, the fear of being harmed, you know, to them and to their children, that oftentimes creates a real barrier to reporting. So the other thing I would say is, you know, and certainly I've seen this as the field has changed over the years, is technology is constantly changing. It's hard to keep track of. I'm challenged keeping track of it with my own children, teenagers and such. And so one of the things that's incumbent upon all of us doing the work is to stay on top of it so that we can really best support survivors. So one of the things we'll share at the end of the presentation is, in addition to NOVA, there's some other fantastic agencies out there who specialize in it, you know, including the National Network to End Domestic Violence, some of you may know, has a wonderful safety net project. Aquatives has the Spark, the Stalking Awareness Prevention Resource Center, and they're constantly putting out information on this technology, which is really a moving target. As soon as we get rid of one type of spyware, another one emerges. And that's a challenge to us as advocates, as well as to survivors. Two other thoughts, you know, in terms of just for advocates out there. I think the other thing that is really incumbent upon all of us in our outreach and advocacy is making sure that our services are inclusive and accessible. You know, one of the things is, as we started to learn more about stalking, and there has been more research, a lot of the research has been limited, and, you know, we're just starting to have a better understanding, and there's been more research about stalking in historically marginalized communities, the LGBT community. And so really looking at, you know, what does stalking look like in those communities? And also in terms of what does reporting look like? And how can we make sure that we're doing really effective outreach and our services are truly accessible to all survivors of stalking? And then the last thing I was just going to share, because I was thinking about this when Anthony was talking about, and I know Myra is going to go into this more, but just, you know, the neurobiology of trauma, and, you know, when survivors come and speak to us, and, you know, what that trauma-informed response looks like is, you know, early on in doing domestic violence advocacy, one of my mentors said to me, and this was before we even knew about trauma-informed advocacy, you know, sometimes the most simple questions, such as, you know, what would you like to have happen today, can be so effective, you know, as someone's trying to organize all of their thoughts and helping them, you know, guide their own journey. So the more that we can help someone focus, and also the more we can listen to them, and empower them to guide their safety plan. Because ultimately, with looking at the lethality and looking at the risk in any stalking situation, it's the survivor who is the best judge in terms of what the actual risks are. So that's all I'm just going to share, and I'm going to turn over to Myra, and I'm happy to take questions at the end, but I'm honored to be co-presenting with her. Thank you. Thanks, Jared.
Thank you. Myra, you want to go ahead and share a little bit as well?
Sure. So, I've been working in this field since 1995 in the field of trauma and victimization in various different ways. I've worked with both offenders and victims, and I've experienced a lot of different types of stalking during my career. And so I put together some slides, just a few things that I thought, bare minimum, what do you think an effective response would include? And so I have a few slides for that. And the first one that I want to start with is when it comes to behavior, right? Like Claire mentioned with the neurobiology of trauma, we have to understand that behaviors are confusing and complicated during that time period. 46% of victims of stalking carry fear because they don't know what's going to happen next, which leads to some complicated behaviors, right? They might be self-medicating, they might have limited attention span, they might not be practicing hygiene in the best way, or like they regularly do. They might have flight mentality where they get overwhelmed and they're just like, oh my gosh, I just can't, and they don't show up to meetings or things like that. They might have issues with sleep or defensiveness. They might be angry, which sometimes we perceive as disrespect. They might be disconnecting or isolated or cutting, high-risk behavior. They might be distracted. I mean, all of these things. Plus, they're human beings living complicated lives. And even when you're not in a state of trauma, and even when you're not in crisis, life is complicated just by itself. We have people in general, everybody, no matter where you're socially located, are trying to navigate life, and they're dealing with their own set of barriers and their own complications and their feelings and their egos and their emotional bandwidth and their resiliency. We're all kind of wrapped up in life, and it's hard already. And so I bring this up because sometimes criminal justice professionals, we tend to see some of these behaviors as disrespect or dishonesty or non-compliance. We don't always understand that maybe the behaviors are actually related to the fear that they are experiencing and the victimization that they were experiencing, and then the trauma that naturally comes with that. So just be aware of that particular space, because we actually have some very specific goals. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the goals next, in the next slide. So when it comes to victims, we have a set of criminal justice goals. You can go ahead and move forward to the next one. And with this, we are trying to create offender accountability. We're trying to create justice. We're trying to work with people. But what we want to do is we want to actually help people transcend from trauma into a space of transcendence, which is a very complicated space for them. It's hard to transcend, and it's hard for us to understand what that even means, because it means different things to different people. That's why I put the words in such a broad way, trauma to transcendence, because to some people, they just want the behaviors to stop. To others, they actually want access to the criminal justice system, and to others yet, they want to get counseling and they want to feel like they're healing their trauma. It means different things to different folks. And so the next thing I would talk about is really looking at our systems. Like Claire mentioned, we want to do trauma-informed advocacy, right? But one of the things about being trauma-informed is that our agencies are actually like living entities on the most part. Like, so we might be trauma informed in 5 different ways, but then we have areas in which we're trauma organized. And then we fix the area where we're trauma organized, but then suddenly this like big storm rolls in, and now we have crisis or COVID-19 or, some other big thing happens and suddenly we are not as able to be trauma informed, and we might be reactive and living in survival mode. We might be fragmented. There might be gossip or toxic loyalty. And then we address the culture and we're back in trauma informed, and we're working again in a space that's safety and secure, transparent and trustworthiness. I mean, in order to be trauma informed requires constant vigilance and constant, looking at our culture and tending it and working really hard collectively to do that. I even think taking it to the next step of being healing inspired or healing organized, where we seek to be human centric, where we are embracing qualities like vulnerability, where we're trying to actually create joy and meaning out of our work, right? When you're trauma organized, it's easy to feel burdened by this space, but if we're trying really hard to get joy and meaning out of our work, we can. It's fluid, it's not a permanent state. None of these are. And then of course, I think that being transformative and trying to actively evolve the system means that we have to dismantle and unpack and do better and address some of our systematic issues, because we absolutely do have some systematic issues. But at the same time, we've come so far from where we used to be. And so as we help people transcend trauma, it's really important for us to be able to pinpoint where we are in our agency cultures in this space and be able to understand organizational trauma. The next piece that I would recommend comes around the concept of being empowered. And this is just a pivot that I would like all of you to kind of consider. I work a lot with advocates around the country, and I often hear the words, I love working in this field because I get to empower people to do that. And the pivot that I would like to introduce, and I think it's an important one, is that we all carry our own sense of empowerment already, right? Like we're all already have power within us. And even in moments of crisis and high stress, we internally have power. Our goals as advocates and as responders is not to empower somebody, but rather to create an environment where we're impacting the soil, we're impacting the water. And you can go ahead and start throwing in those fly-ins, right? We're creating sunshine. We are creating an environment where people's natural empowerment can start to grow. So I like to think of us as we're more like gardeners rather than empowerers, because we're not in charge of somebody else's power. We just work hard to create that environment where they can feel empowered and their own sense of power can grow and become stronger, right? That's why we aim for being trauma informed in the first place, is because the culture in which we do our work and the way that we do our work really matters. I love this quote. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows. You don't try to fix the flower. And that's what we're striving to do by providing trauma-informed, healing-inspired services, is we're trying to fix the environment so then that way they can grow healthier in that space. The next thing I want to take into consideration is each and every one of your clients is going to be totally and completely unique. They are unique. The way their neural pathways have formed makes them totally unique. The way they've lived their lives, the experiences they've gathered, the level of emotional ability that they have, the emotional resiliency. We are all complicated creatures, really. Humans are so complicated, and we have to approach each and every one of our clients with total individualism. We can have these broad brush strokes, like be trauma informed, but also understand that their brains are totally different than your brains. And sometimes I hear things, well, if that happened to me, I would do this. Well, they're not you. They're totally different than you, and they have a whole different set of histories and experiences. So keep that in mind when we're working with clients, is their responses might not necessarily be like yours. They might not make sense to you, but they make sense to them in their own lives. And so let's keep that in mind, and let's strive for individualistic care. So for example, let's take safety planning. I really love to do safety planning on a tree. So go ahead and let me show you what I mean by that. So I like to look at this tree, and when I look at the tree, I see the possibility of being a holistic safety planner. So you've got this individual, right? And say you're doing a safety plan for them, just a little tiny one. the first thing you want to do is you want to set up maybe, you know, their formal network and their informal network. And then you want to, you know, help them with some of their emotional stress. It's just one branch of this tree. A full-on safety plan would really address all areas of their life. And that really requires a lot of going back and forth with clients to explore what their lives are. But say you want to set up a formal network, they have children, so you're going to set them up with their school counselor at the school, with an advocate, and then the advocate is going to help them do case management, court stuff, and be the go-between between the police and prosecutor. Or say you're going to set them up with a school counselor who's going to help with parent resources, right? Maybe their informal network. And I love utilizing informal networks because it can really make a huge difference. Like, for example, set up a best friend advocate. So what I mean by that, like, say I was a victim of a crime and I'm feeling a lot of trauma. I would ask my first responders to work with my husband, Russ. And I would say, you know what, Russ is going to be my go-between in all of this. So if you have to tell me about court, or if you have to tell me about anything, you tell Russ, and then Russ will help me navigate this process. Because sometimes clients are not in the mental space to be able to do that. But if you say they have a best friend who can help provide a helpful ear, or can help with transportation, or can be that go-between between them and the criminal justice system, it really makes a big difference. And then the last piece, emotional, you know, make sure that they know what it means to cope in the moment. Let them know that they're going to experience triggers and that they're going to get scared and they're going to have these moments, and help them build a plan to deal with that emotional storm as it comes, because we can absolutely learn how to regulate ourselves. It just requires some time. You know, like, for example, I learned a lot with my counseling with somatic experiencing, and I know EMDR also is a really great tool, so learning about that. Now let's look at this tool just one more time, but just in a different way for safety planning, so you can see how flexible it is. Say you're helping them with stalking, you know, you might want to look at them from a day-to-day, you know, map out their day, like, okay, every day they have to go to work, every day they have to take their kids to school. How do you make those routes safe, right? Maybe it is an order of protection, or maybe it is talking to a coworker, and maybe it is school, you know. And on that order of protection question that Anthony had, one of the things that I would recommend is to look at your individual state, right? Because each state actually has different laws around orders of protection. Like, I just recently lived in Arizona, and in the state of Arizona had 5 different kinds of orders of protection that were available to clients, but that didn't count tribal orders of protection. Like, the Navajo Nation actually has an order of protection that is really it's harder to get. It's got more steps to get, but it's a 5-year order of protection, and it can define things like who's going to get custody of the kids during that 5 years, who's going to live in the home. You know, even just things like money issues can all be defined in this order of protection. That's why it's harder to get. So look at your individual area. And if you're working with reservations, look at each reservation specifically, because some of them have the capacity for these like really cool programs, and they have their own court system. And then some of them really rely heavily on federal stuff, working with FBI and Bureau of the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so, you know, you have to really do that localized research. The next one on this is, you know, that stalking journal. A stalking journal is really a lot of help, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The next thing I want to talk about, just to really bring it home, is make sure that this is a collaborative process. Make sure that there's a lot of go between. You shouldn't be doing more talking than the client. In fact, in this particular space, when you're mapping out and you're helping them figure out what's going on in their life, they should be doing more talking than you, right? They are the experts in their own lives. And, you know, I loved how Claire framed that in asking them what it is that they want to accomplish in this particular space, because that's often very surprising. You know, what they are aiming to accomplish might be very different than what you're aiming to accomplish with them. So make sure you're collaborating with your client. Make sure that they're really playing a role in this, because remember, you're the garden and you're helping them cultivate their own sense of power. Last couple pieces, and then I'll kind of wrap up, is when people are in crisis, they tend to think about what's going on in bubbles, right? Like in their head, they're just like, and then I got some flowers, which reminded me 3 years ago this happened, and then this happened, and then my sister Jan, and da-da-da. And their memories are popping up like this all over the place. And sometimes it's really hard to follow what's going on. And especially as an advocate, we want to kind of try to capture those bubbles. What I would do is put down a big piece of paper and I would write the bubbles down, but I wouldn't try to write them down in a timeline. And then I would later help them put them into a timeline, because people who are helping them access justice prefer working with a timeline. You know, detectives and prosecutors, they're more able to work with a timeline. They have less capacity to be able to do this type of work. So we want to translate the bubble into a timeline, but we want to recognize that we want to let those bubbles pop up. Don't interrupt them. Don't tell them, hey, wait. You're telling me that you just got flowers and now you're talking about 1995. Let's just try to stay on track, or let's start in. Don't try to force them to talk in a timeline, and don't try to box in their thoughts. Let the bubbles come up, and then afterwards put the pieces together, because in their head it's totally making sense and it's all related. And once it all comes out, you actually start to see what's going on in a more holistic way. So just let them go. And then the next piece, most people don't recognize that they're going to be victims of crime. And so I don't know about you, if something suddenly happened and I was going to be entering into a, you know, the criminal justice system or the civil system or something, my paperwork looks like this, right? It's not organized. It's not like that. And when I used to work with clients, sometimes they would literally show up with bags of just papers, because I would ask them, bring in your papers and let's together organize this. This process in and of itself is very useful to them and helps them to feel empowered. I always used to keep blank binders with the little things, and then they could help them put their papers and help them organize, because then they're able to start helping law enforcement with some of those complicated details, right? They like the timeline, but they also want to corroborate some of this stuff, because stalking is very difficult to gather evidence on. So we had talked about the stalking log, and so far Claire and Anthony both mentioned it. We have an example of the stalking log in here, and here's what the stalking log looks like, right? It's just a log. There's that you just ask them anytime there's something happens, just put their date, what time it happened, how long that lasted, because sometimes it could be they're parked across the street and they're parked across the street all day long, and have the location, and if there's any witnesses, anybody who can corroborate that and say, yeah, that it was, or if there's pictures, right? If they have pictures, have them add, and I took pictures, they're timestamped, and I took pictures at 9 a.m., noon, whatever, you know. And then feelings, how did they feel about that? Did they feel scared? What's the context of that moment? You know, if somebody delivers some flowers, how do they feel about that? What did the flowers mean to the person receiving that? And then last point, I've got 2 slides to discuss the last point. Just remember, and this is one of the toughest parts, and we've brought it up a couple times, is that they are in control of their own lives. They have their own choices, they can control, they have their own agency, it's their choices, they have the power to decide, they are the experts of their own lives. Now on the next slide, this is really important that you understand. They may not choose the path that you would choose, and intellectually and in theory, right? This is easy. It's a super easy concept to understand. In training, we're just like, yeah, totally. They're going to make different choices. When it becomes difficult is in the moment. In the moment when you can see that the path that they're taking is maybe leading them to a dangerous space, we want to help them take another place. We want to try to influence that choice. And you can tell them, okay, let's look at that choice. Let's critically think about that. Let's map it out. Use that tree. You make this choice. What are the possible outcomes of that choice? But at the end of the day, it's still their choice. And approach that moment with as much compassion and non-judgment as you can. Because remember, in a domestic violence situation, it takes 7 to 12 times to leave a relationship, and they might only be talking to you during time number 3. And you want to remain a safe person in their life, right? You're their gardener, and you know, you want to make sure that as their gardener, you're creating that safe space, so then that way at time number 4, time number 5, time number 6, they can come back and they'll always feel safe with you. If they don't feel safe with you and they feel judged in that particular moment, then in many ways they're losing a resource. They're losing you, which is really sad, because you're amazing, right? And you don't want your clients to lose you in this particular space. So with that, that's all I have to say. Those are the most core important things I had to say about stalking and advocacy.
Thank you so much. Myra and Claire, we have responded to several questions, but we do have one particular question I'd like to ask now, Myra. That question is, and Claire, is there a virtual support group for non-domestic stalking victims? This individual is located in Florida.
No.
That's a wonderful question. I think we'll have to get back to you. I think that what I'd like to do is check with, I think two things. Acquidis's Stalking Prevention Resource Center, while they don't provide direct services, they are really they're the OVW provider and the national expert right now in stalking. So I'm going to look to them to see what they know. The other thing is, even though we're asking about non-domestic violence related stalking, it might be helpful if they're in Florida to start with the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence to see about what resources, particularly a lot of district attorney offices now have, specific units dedicated to just stalking. And so a victim advocate within those units might be coordinating a support group. So that's another possible resource. But if they want to email me directly, I'm happy to try and connect them with resources. And my email is going to be provided at the end, I know.
Yes, thank you. And what we can also do as well is provide them with our VINE program manager for Florida. They will also have additional information to share. All right, let's see. Jared, would you like to close out with Myra and Claire, and then we'll move a little bit further into the presentation as we wrap our session up today.
Absolutely. Just want to say thank you so much, Myra and Claire, for that overview, for giving more detail on, what an advocate can keep in mind when they're working with victims, stalking victims in particular. All right, I know we do want to do just a couple more things, so if you all can hang with us for a few minutes, we would really appreciate it. One thing that we've talked about law enforcement, we've talked about victim services. We also mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that technology providers are an important part of this network that can work with other professionals to support victims. Well, fortunately, I happen to work for one. We work for APRIS, and so I didn't really have to go far to find someone to provide some knowledge, some expertise on what it's like to work for a technology provider that works and keeps victims in mind. So Karen is going to serve as our technological subject matter expert today. And so Karen, for technology providers who support victims of crime, what can they do to make safety a part of their device development, of their app development? Things like that.
Good question. And I believe we had a similar type of question in our box from our attendees. Technology providers can deliver those services and resources in discrete and easily accessible ways. What APRIS does, APRIS has developed the VINE service, Victim Information and Notification Every Day, developed in 1994. Today, with the new layout, there are even more features to help with navigating VINE, including new sections that explain what VINE is, as well as those key VINE features and information. For example, like how do I access the service and what it means to register for notification. Here's what we know. We know that apps with even legitimate purposes can be misused. Knowing that our VINE service can be critical for receiving those life-saving information and notification details, privacy is a foundational principle for VINE. Not only when you think about the features and the information, not only is VINE a completely confidential service, we also have made efforts to help people understand their own privacy and safety when they're using our service. Here are some examples. We include a privacy policy, terms of use. We also as well provide information about your device browser and private browsing tips, the particular browser that you may be using. With safety in mind, we provide pathways and guidance on how to connect to emergency are important victim resources through Vine. And I know that we had several questions on how can I find out more about helping a victim in my state. We encourage you to access the Vine service to get additional information about advocacy groups and law enforcement details within your state. Jared, additionally, the experiences that victims and survivors are also at the forefront of our product development. We know that a victim, that survivor, may be coming to Vine under extreme stress, under trauma, and we want them to be able to find the information they need right at the time that they need it. This led to a recent redesign of vinelink.com. The new layout, released earlier this year, was developed in part from feedback that we've received from survivors, from advocates who actually use Vine, taking into consideration their information, allowing us to create a more victim-centric, trauma-informed design. And we were able to identify those main actions people take when they are on the Vine service. Take into consideration more details about how we can redesign the actual design of Vine. We've done that in several different ways. How do you access Vine? Can I create an account, a VineLink account? Can I get in touch with a service provider? Ultimately, we hope that there's a more personalized experience, allowing everyone who uses Vine to quickly access and easily access the information they need. And Jared, we have another slide here that I'm going to navigate through very, very quickly, because we're going to as well provide everyone with a PDF of the presentation, and there is a recording coming soon. So I want us to navigate to our cyber safety tips.
Absolutely, Karen. And this is a good place for us to kind of close out, because I do think it is important to share some of these tips on preventing victimization. We've talked a lot about responding, but let's look at some of the ways that we can kind of work towards preventing. Not only because it's National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but it's also National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So right on theme for that as well. All right. So quickly, just want to share here, you'll see a graphic. This was developed by the National Network to End Domestic Violence that gives some clues that stalking apps may be installed on a phone. And so the most common sign there is that the abuser may have some suspicious behavior. So they may know more about that victim's phone, their activities on the phone without any explanation. So they may be acting a little bit suspiciously because they are, spying through that phone. Some other additional signs that spyware may be on a device. The battery may drain very rapidly. The device could turn off and on. There may be some spikes in data usage. If that spyware is detected, a victim could remove that spyware. Factory reset can remove that, but we do want to make sure that victims are cautious when they're reinstalling apps or files if they do it from a backup or even from an app store, the Play Store, because they could inadvertently re-download that spyware. So it's just recommended that apps or software be manually added back onto the phone. We also want to make sure that victims exercise caution if someone wants to update or fix something on their phone. So encourage them to trust their instincts. If they don't think that person has good intentions, make sure that they are not giving that phone over or that device over. And if they did give someone access to their device, make sure that they see if they consider if it coincided with increased monitoring or stalking from that individual. Most spyware requires physical access to the phone to install, so a passcode lock could be placed on their phone, not shared with other people, and that helps minimize the risk of installing that spyware. Other studies even recommended downloading antivirus, anti-spyware apps to help prevent spyware from being installed or scanned to see if it's present on the phone. And we have just a few tips here. We know that technology is a powerful tool for someone leaving a domestic violence situation, and so we want to promote a few ways to ensure safety. First, when surfing the internet, consider the computer being used might be monitored, the places we visit are stored on the device being used, like bills that we pay, purchases that we make. So suggest that victims find safe computers. They could be located at a local library, internet cafes, shelters, or even their workplace. The best practice is to use safe computers when researching things like travel plans, housing options, legal issues, or legal advice, and safety plans. So if a victim thinks their online accounts are being accessed, they can also change their username and passwords for safety. Instant messages can also be retrieved. An abusive partner could have access to a victim's email account. So to be safe, the victim should open an email account that their partner doesn't know about on a safe computer and use that account for safety planning and sensitive communications. And it's always a good idea to keep monitoring that account active, the one that is being monitored, active with non-critical emails, just to keep up appearances there. Cell phones as well, those can be a beacon. They track a victim's location in real time. So if even call and text history can be retrieved by an abusive partner. So a pay-as-you-go phone could be purchased that can help ensure safety, just as a safeguard. And with social media, we should set boundaries, set limits. A victim should only post things on social media they want the public to see or know. Because once it's online, it's no longer under their control. Their phone numbers, addresses enable people to contact them directly, and their birth date, schools they've attended, their employer, photos with landmarks. All of those things make it easier for someone to find where they live, where they hang out, where they go to school. Much easier to find that person. A couple quick apps that we want to share with you all. There is not necessarily a standard that any technology provider has to follow in addressing potential for risk or abuse in their products, but these are a few good things that you can refer victims to. First is the Tech Safety app. Claire mentioned this earlier, the National Network to End Domestic Violence. They have their technology safety program. This app is developed by them, and it explores 6 categories: harassment, impersonation, cell phone safety, device safety, location safety, and online safety. And then under each one of those categories, more information is provided with specific explanations on what someone can do if they're being harassed, as well as privacy tips that can be used to increase their privacy and security. There are also additional resources on documenting abuse, talking with an advocate, contacting police, getting an attorney, and where to call for help. Next, there is an app called Victim's Voice. This allows victims to document abuse incidents in a secure and private manner. This is legally permissible documentation. There are some guidelines, there are guiding questions that they can go through within the app to ensure that there's no information that's left out or forgotten. There is an annual subscription fee with this, but that information is kept safe. So even if that subscription lapses, that person can then, once they renew, access that information back on file, should they need it later on. And of course, anything that they do on a device with stalkerware could be revealed to the person monitoring it. So consider again using a device that isn't monitored. Last, of course, is our VineLink app. Karen talked a little bit about this already, but Vine does allow victims and survivors, concerned citizens to search for timely offender, court case and protective order information in some states, as well as register for updates to anytime those records are updated. And there are many, many features of Vine that help that person find information, connect with important resources, and of course, get peace of mind and information on where an offender currently is when they're incarcerated. All right, Karen, I think we are ready to close out with just a couple resources and contact information.
Yes, we are, and we definitely want to be respectful of everyone's time. We have a reflection question that they will see within the PDF document that we're going to provide. Just getting that information here. We want you to know about certain victim resources that Jared and I, along with the panel, have provided for you. And we've listed them here, beginning with access to more information about NOVA. And you'll also see more details about Stalking Prevention, Awareness, and Resource Center, SPARK. We have that link listed here for you. NNEDV. We've talked quite a bit about NNEDV and Safety Net Project, so we listed that link for you here. Myra Strand can be reached at Strand Squared, and this is Myra's contact information as well. We recently published a blog that talks to APRIS and NOVA's partnership, and that blog features Claire Ponder-Selib. Please read that blog. We would love for you to see that information, sharing this link with our viewers. And then, of course, as we mentioned, VineLink, you can access how to search and get notified by going to www.vinelink.com for offender and court case information. In your handouts, you will see Join the Conversation, and these details will help you connect with Vine. So you'll be able to see that information through the handouts. This is by far one of the most important slides, Jared and panelists, because we want to thank you for your time today. As much as we appreciate our attendees joining us, if each of you would mind turning your webcams on and giving our attendees additional details. Actually, I can read some as well and give you an opportunity to say your closing thoughts. Let's start with you, Anthony. I know that you've presented during the 32nd annual virtual COVA conference just this week, right? And you've done a session on preserving and enhancing dignity within sexual assault response and trauma-informed response to stalking.
So I did that, and I just want to say I just really appreciated the opportunity to be here with you, Karen and Jared, and also with Claire and Myra. You know, I've just followed their work and do admire what they do, and so I just wanted to. It's been an honor to be there. And I want to thank all of our participants for being here and hanging in even during the time that we've gone over. But still, just thank you so much and thank APRIS for what they do. You know, being the program manager here in Colorado, I've learned a lot about APRIS, and I'm also on the National Advisory Committee. And so I've learned a lot about the folks and what APRIS does and the passion that they have for victims and victim safety. So thank you so much.
Jared, our panelists have been busy, and thank you, Claire, Anthony, just for your responses. So for both Claire and Myra, NOVA is currently registering for their winter 2021 NOVA campus advocacy training and NOVA Advanced Sex Training Academy. The Sex Trafficking Academy is offered in partnership with Strand Squared. So Claire and Myra, just as Anthony has said, his closing words, would you share with us also?
Yes, and first of all, thank you so much, APRIS, for your leadership on this important issue and for inviting us to participate in this webinar today. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Myra. It's an honor and a privilege to present with you. Thank you all for participating today. Thank you for the critical work that you do in your communities each and every day to support and advocate for victims and survivors of stalking and other forms of crime. We at NOVA are committed to supporting you and supporting your work. So I invite you to reach out and hear about our trainings and how we can support you better. Thank you so much.
And Myra?
Yeah, and just to mirror everyone's thoughts, I feel so humbled to be sitting here at the panel with all of you guys. You know, many of you are just doing so much great work, and it's really nice to be included. And thank you to all the participants, because stalking really is just such a big deal in people's lives, and it can wreak havoc for years and years and years. And you know, it's nice to get the tangible tools to start helping people transcend that space.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Claire and Myra. Jared, would you like to share information with our attendees on our schedule for this month and next month?
Absolutely. Just want to say again, thank you everyone for attending. I really appreciate, and for those who could hang on for a few minutes, we really appreciate that. Just want to say Karen and I just recently presented during the 19th annual National Conference Against Domestic Violence. We actually did a similar session to this on stalking in the digital age. Coming up next month, In November, we'll be presenting at the National Center for Victims of Crime as part of their National Training Institute, their virtual conference. That's scheduled for November 11th through 13th. So if you are there, please come to our session. We'd love to have you again.
Thank you. And to everyone who's attended our session today, we value what you do in your community. Thank you for taking out just a little bit of time in your day to join us for the session. Everyone be safe and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye, thank you.